dictator Viktor Orban feels this
State of Texas in front of a tiny crowd because almost all Americans do not agree with a handful of wealthy freaks who go to CPAC. Anyway, within the context of Freak Pack, a speaker's open hatred towards so-called race mixing gets you applause, especially if it's counterintuitively paired with a drive to increase Hungary's domestic supply of infants. Wow, that is... wow. Don't want to jump to conclusions, but it seems like these Republican fellows I'm reading about here are a bunch of racists. White nationalism and Christofascism are Viktor Orban's whole deal. CPAC celebrity Viktor Orban. His anti-gay law in 2021 didn't just ban LGBTQ content in Hungarian children's television. It also banned gay concepts in Hungarian classrooms, and generally targeted Hungarians who wish to say gay. It was a do not say gay law, if I may speak Floridian for a moment. In a democracy, you need your big, huge laws to have at least a little popular support, but Orban's Don't Say Gay law is so unpopular, he couldn't even do his national referendum trick to legitimize it. His 2022 anti-gay referendum lost, despite definitely getting the votes of his most hardcore freaks. But his unpopular law is still on the books, because if you're Orban's government, who cares? You can make gay illegal and racially pick and choose your refugees and fund billboards depicting George Soros as a puppet master, wink wink, anti-Semitic wink, or say Europe must not succumb to the Soros network, because Viktor Orban does his anti-Semitism the professional dog whistly way. Orban can do all that because he's way past caring what anybody else wants. Hey, do we have a video of Orban depicting George Soros as a puppet master? Oh, darn, sorry, that was from a GOP convention from back in May. Totally not the same situation. Anyway, on the subject of conventions and junk, Viktor Orban does a limited amount of actual campaigning for the office he's basically going to hold for life. What campaigning he does do seems to be focused on demonizing specific targets, in particular, George Soros. For whatever reason, such as, I don't know, anti-Semitism, George Soros is an easy target for conservatives making stuff up. And apparently, it's extra mega easy to do this stuff in Hungary. Orban loves criticizing George Soros as a spooky foreign influence, because after all, he's not even from the... oh, okay. It says here George Soros was born and raised in Hungary, specifically. Out of all the countries in the entire world, he's from Hungary. Wow. Also, he is old, so he was born there in the 1930s, lived through Nazi occupation, and had to survive the Holocaust by going into hiding as a child, like Anne Frank, another child-type person. But then, George Soros lived to adulthood. In adulthood, he spent making money, yes, and then using a lot of that money to support charitable causes and global health and education. But then also living to see his home country lose its own democracy, and lose that to a guy who, and this is pretty wild, had an education and opportunities that George Soros personally subsidized. Really. You see, they say Viktor Orban grew up a poor rural kid, and Orban's whole life changed in the mid-1980s when he got accepted by a new college in Budapest called István Bibó. It was a wildly underfunded college that stayed in operation thanks to a fairy godmother-style visit from George Soros, who bankrolled its language courses, bankrolled its study abroad program, bought them a photocopier, and funded a student journal whose editor-in-chief was young apple-cheeked Viktor Orban. So it's very cool that Orban went on to kill every form of Hungarian independent media, in part by withdrawing government funding for advertising, which was sometimes advertising that demonized George Soros. It's very cool and not at all uniquely f***ed up. On the bright side, and it's not the bright side, I just wanted to give you a quick morsel of hope, Viktor Orban is trying to destroy George Soros' entire philanthropic life's work by doing stuff like undermining the entire Hungarian educational system and closing a new Budapest college Soros founded. Because, as we all know from reading the very good editorial section of the New York Times, woke college campuses are basically the #1 threat to society. Hungarian quasi-dictator Viktor Orban feels this exact way. Along with a free and independent media, a basic state of intellectual freedom is one of the few ways Hungarian people could choose to agree to vote Viktor Orban out. So he's terrified of that, because he's not yet a dictator for life. But he's working on it, starting with being a real weirdo. You see, Viktor Orban is a soccer fan, and he's a die-hard fan of the soccer team in his tiny rural hometown of Felcsút, Hungary, a rustic, remote hamlet of less than 2,000 people, which is now dwarfed by a 4,000-seat soccer stadium that landed in it like a damn UFO. What in the heck? That f***ing monstrosity also landed a total of 20 feet from the country house of Viktor Orban, which is all pretty convenient. It's also tax deductible, which is also convenient. Orban's government threw a change into their tax code that makes investment in sports tax deductible, which helped him buy a lasting upgrade to his favorite sports team. And a perfect metaphor for his totalitarianism. If you buy a man a visit from Dennis Rodman, he Rodmans for a day. If you buy your favorite sports guys an entire stadium, you Rodman for a lifetime. Grease that down in your notebooks. Okay, so what now? What do we do about Hungary's backslide and collapse into non-democracy? Their next election is in 2026, a fact I will forget almost instantly, and a fact, whatever it was, that, as discussed, has almost no bearing on Hungarian politics. Orban's political party, Fidesz, has such a crushing grasp on power in Hungary that the latest election featured completely new opposition parties, because the previous opposition parties were that f***ed. My answer to what we do about this specific situation is... I don't know. Not sure if you noticed yet, but I'm not Hungarian. I am United Statesian. Except here in the United States, Viktor Orban is sort of running for president. Don't get me wrong, he's super not. But as discussed, he's the keynote speaker at the main conference of the party that could be in charge of this country within a few Novembers. Viktor Orban got the Ronald Reagan slot on that lineup. I wanted to check for more evidence of this kind of thing, where Viktor Orban is secretly influencing the Republican Party, so I did a crafty, sneaky, Illuminati maneuver known as looking into the public statements of American Republicans. And, surprise, they can't stop talking about how hard Viktor Orban gives them thick, girthy Rodmans. Recent Republican president and true American patriot Steve Bannon praises Orban constantly, describing him as, quote, the most significant guy on the scene right now, on the scene. Bannon also planned to work for him on Orban's Hungarian election campaign, despite Bannon being, deep down under all those shirts, a United Statesian. Orban has also hosted visits from former Vice President Mike Pence and former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and many other officials with no earthly reason to go across half the earth to visit Hungary. One of Bannon's most key subordinates, the Saudi Arabian Gulf enthusiast and 9/11 truther Donald John Trump, officially endorsed Viktor Orban's campaign for Prime Minister in 2022. On the one hand, this makes sense because Trump was, apparently, an American president. On the other hand, he is no longer the president, and has never had a huge enthusiasm for international policy details, or, let's be honest, policy details, or, let's lay it all on the table, details. Point is, it's notable that Donald Trump bothered to discuss a Hungarian election at all. It's literally not his job to care anymore, if ever. Since when has any United Statesian paid any attention to Hungary? Surprise, they've paid huge attention since the election of Viktor Orban. Their main media figure, Taco Snarlston, made an entire documentary about how great Viktor Orban is. He even titled it, Hungary versus Soros, the fight for civilization. End quote. Start your engines, anti-Semites. Republicans watched this documentary in droves, despite possessing the same streaming access to every good show, just like you and me. They watched that instead of everything. Instead of watching The Bear, or Andor, or my fan film combination about a blue milk cantina. So yeah, this is why Hungary is something we needed to talk about. On the government front, Viktor Orban is a direct source of ideas for bills to draft and pass and make laws. Most prominently, so far, that's happened with the so-called Don't Say Gay law in the US state of Florida. A law that's been unfairly called Don't Say Gay, in the sense that that's not the literal text on the top of the first page, but is otherwise what it's going for. According to an interview with conservative blogger Rod Dreher, Florida Republicans are telling anyone who will listen that they got the idea from Viktor Orban. Also, Dreher said this during a panel about American conservatism held in the city of Budapest, Hungary, because I cannot overemphasize how much influence a quasi-dictator in Hungary holds over a major United States political party. And it's fucking weird no one is paying attention. Pretty damn scary when you see an authoritarian speaking and then a bunch of Republicans in the corner taking notes. Maybe something we should flag. This is two parties shipping ideas back and forth in a two-way exchange of authoritarianisms to the point where Hungarian conservative politicians are now calling stuff woke. To be clear, they are not saying a Hungarian word that means the same thing as woke. They picked up the English word woke from us. Not the original meaning of the word, mind you, but the GOP's definition of woke, for the exact same purpose as them, as in anything the left does that they don't like. Like how Florida passed a law that says if you talk about race in schools or in workplaces, you are doing a thought crime. Now that is an American law full of freedom, is what I would say if I read that law and loved freedom for America. And when they drafted that very free law that is great for freedom, they backwards acronymed a name for it that spells out woke. Because Florida is our most Hungarian state, thanks to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He is quietly Hungarian it up, even though he is as American as a baseball smashed into apple pie on paper. Did you know he's fully a Little League World Series champion in baseball, and he's probably eating pie? At some point, Ron DeSantis is also maybe our next president. To be clear, nobody really knows. DeSantis gets written about that way because he has the most support among Trump supporters without being the guy, and he clearly wants to run.
You talk about Joe Biden a lot. I understand. You think you're going to be running against him. I can see how you might get confused, but you're running for governor. You're running for governor, and I have a question for you. You're running for governor. Why don't you look in the eyes of the people of the state of Florida and say to them, if you're reelected, you will serve a full 4-year term as governor? Yes or no? Yes or no, Ron? Will you serve a full 4-year term if you're reelected governor of Florida? It's not a tough question. It's a fair question. He won't tell you.
We've talked about him a lot because of the fascist-ass vibes he gives out. But if we take a closer look, he's barely ever won an election. Ron DeSantis wields humongous power in Florida, despite winning one election for governor by a margin so close they had to do an automatic recount. What is up with Florida and recounts? Just learn to count! After DeSantis barely won that election, he and his legislature rewrote Florida's election laws multiple times over before he has to face re-election in the fall of 2022. Which I'm guessing is why he won? Did he win? Blast us in the comments if Ron DeSantis won, and like and subscribe, and I'm sorry if you live in Florida. He even signed that first bill in a secret room that the media was not allowed to enter. Very normal baseball apple pie stuff. DeSantis also props up his just the assholes voter base by hitting the exact notes Orban hits, about how the gays are actually a dangerous groomer threat, and how the immigrants are coming for our jobs and way of life, and so on. Viktor Orban and Ron DeSantis are both victims, you see, and that's why it's necessary for them to completely reshape their entire